Hello friends, if you are new here, welcome to my channel. My name is Rachelle. As you read in the title of this video, today I will be sharing with you all the books I read from January to May. This is my first book video and I'm so excited for it. Before we get into it, I really want to give you a little backstory about my reading journey. So when I was younger, I used to read a lot. And by a lot, I mean like I would always be reading a book every single week. And at one point, I don't know why, I kind of just stopped. And now that I think back to it, I'm just really sad because I wish I continued reading. But I'm not gonna dwell on the past because recently I picked up reading again. By recently, I mean fall of 2020. Yeah, so last fall was when I officially started reading again for fun. And oh my god, I forgot how much I loved reading. So ever since then, I've just been reading quite a bit, especially since the beginning of 2021. And I thought it'd be so fun to share with you guys what I've been reading in a video. I don't know why I didn't think of this video sooner. I mean, I've just been reading so much lately, and reading has slowly become a big part of my life just because it's an activity that I do quite often now. It blows my mind how I like to make lifestyle videos, and I have never considered doing a book video, even though it has been such a big part of my life recently. But I mean, I guess it's better late than never. So as I said earlier in this video, I thought it'd be fun to just wrap up everything I've been reading since the beginning of the year. Before we get into discussing what I read recently, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, click the bell icon to stay up to date of when and what I post, and give this video a thumbs up. Okay, I have my melted iced coffee. And let's get chatting, shall we? Starting off with January, the first book I read was The Viscount Who Loved Me by Julia Quinn. This book is the second book of the Bridgerton series. The story takes place in the year 1814 in the Regency era. It follows Anthony Bridgerton, the eldest child of the Bridgerton family. In this story, Anthony decides that it is time for him to get married, and he even chose a wife. But the obstacle standing in his way of marrying this woman he chose for himself is his future bride's older sister, Kate. Kate is determined to protect her little sister, and she knows men like Anthony who are rakes do not make great husbands. Thinking this, Kate is determined to stop this marriage between Anthony and her younger sister, which ultimately drives Anthony mad. But even though Anthony has his eyes set on Kate's younger sister, when Anthony closes his eyes at night, Kate is the one haunting Anthony's erotic dreams. Meanwhile, Kate also fears that her own heart is vulnerable to the charms of Anthony Bridgerton. Okay, so I started reading the Bridgerton series right after the show came out. So after I watched the show, I read the first book in December, and then in January, I started the second book. Honestly, I started reading this book because I wanted to see the difference between the show and the books. And let me tell you, they are so different. I know whenever they make films or TV shows based off of books, they're just adaptations. But in my opinion, even though they are adaptations, I would still like to see the book and the film or TV show to be quite similar, with maybe a couple minor adjustments. Sadly, that was not the case with the Bridgerton series because there were just so many differences. Everything that was shown of Anthony in the first season, I was expecting that to be in The Viscount Who Loved Me, but it just wasn't there. Technically, even though the first season of the show wasn't based off of The Viscount Who Loved Me, I still kind of just compared it a little bit in my head. And because I watched the show before I read the book, I'm kind of afraid to say this because this is definitely going to be an unpopular opinion, but I kind of preferred the show over the book. I just felt like the show was a lot more interesting than the book because there was just more conflict in the show. After watching the show, I think in the book I was just looking for more conflict between more characters, and I know romance novels are usually focused on the two main characters, but I still think the story in the book still could have used a little bit more relationship building with other characters the two main characters are associated with. Summing all of that up, after watching the show, I kind of just expected more from the book. All of that being said, I could not give a rating for this book on Goodreads just because it is a decent read and I think my opinions are just a little biased, so I thought it would be unfair to give it a rating. After reading The Viscount Who Loved Me, I wanted to read another romance book, so one of my good friends recommended me books by LJ Shen, and she was like, you need to read the Sinners of Saints series. So I listened to her, and the first book I read was Vicious by LJ Shen. In addition to switching between character perspectives, this book also alternates between two different time periods. It alternates between the present and 10 years ago when Vicious and Amelia were in high school. 10 years ago, Vicious made Amelia run away from the small town that they both lived in, so Amelia moved to New York, and in the present, while in New York, Vicious runs into Amelia, and he decides that he is not leaving New York until he takes Amelia back with him. If you are looking for a really good enemies to lovers book, this is your book. It's so good. Upon reading the romance part of this novel, I was like, wow, this is steamy. Actually, that's with all LJ Shen books. They're all pretty steamy. So I'd say that her books are catered towards older audiences. I will also say that this book is pretty dark. It deals with subjects like abuse. So if this book might interest you, I just want to prepare you of what you might be reading. Touching on my thoughts on this book, I thought it was well paced and the character development and backstory was also really good as well. I was constantly engaged every chapter of the book. On Goodreads, I rated this book a solid 4 stars. This book is my favorite book out of the Sinners of Saint series. The Sinners of Saint series really just follows this male group of friends called the Hot Holes. The 4 men who make up the Hot Holes are all millionaires and they all work together and they all establish this company together. And each book features one of the Hot Holes and their lovers. Okay, so even though every book in the Sinners of Saint series is a complete standalone, I couldn't stop there. I am that person who is tempted to continue reading the entire series no matter what. I am also not someone who can read one book of the series right now and then read the second book months later. So the next book I read in January is the second book of the Sinners of Saint series, and that is titled Ruckus. Ruckus follows Dean, who is one of the Hot Holes, and his lover is Rosie, someone Dean went to high school with in the past. Rosie also happens to be the younger sister of Amelia from the first book. So you can kind of see how all of these books are interconnected. Although Dean and Rosie met in high school, this book takes place 11 years later when they are both grown adults. Dean being Rosie's sister's ex-boyfriend, Rosie originally thinks that Dean is off limits, even though she's loved him since high school. This story really just tells the story of how Dean and Rosie came together as a couple, while Rosie deals with her health problems as a CF patient, and Dean deals with his own personal problems. I like this book, but I would say that the first book, Vicious, was a lot better. The character development and the story itself didn't really stand out to me. On Goodreads, I rated this book a solid 3 stars. The last book I read in January is the 3rd book of the Sinners of Saint series, and that is Scandalous. This book follows the hot hole Trent, who is a powerful self-made mogul. Trent appears to be ruthless and unfeeling to those around him who don't know him. But behind closed doors, he's a 33-year-old single dad who hides his broken, lonely heart. This book also showcases Eddie, who is an 18-year-old girl. She was born into a wealthy family, but she's everything but a typical rich kid. When Eddie is cut off financially by her father, she's forced to start pickpocketing, and her latest victim turns out to be a relative of Trent's. Trent actually catches her in the act and he notices that she is the daughter of his business partner. A few days later, she finds herself working for him completely against her own will. In my opinion, this book wasn't bad, but it also wasn't my favorite out of the entire series. After reading the first 2 books in the series, I just developed a liking towards the Hot Holes, so that is why I started reading this book. My favorite part of this book was how the characters were written. I would say this book is a decent read and I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. Let's talk about February. In February, I only read 1 book. The book I read in February is, of course, the 4th book of the Sinners of Saint series. That book is titled Bane. The story follows Bane, who is a surfer and a self-made entrepreneur. He owns a small cafe and recently just bought a hotel, but he dreams about opening up a surf park. He is determined and willing to do anything to get the funding to open up this surf park. Bane finally finds an investor named Darren who agrees to give him $6 million, but the only request Darren has is for Bane to help his stepdaughter Jessie to get over the horrors she's been through in the past and bring her back into the world. The only thing Bane is not allowed to do is sleep with Jessie. Bane thinks this will be an easy challenge to get the $6 million for his surf park, but what he doesn't know is that after spending time with Jessie, he starts to develop feelings for her. This book is so different from the rest of the series because Bane is not one of the Hot Holes. And I guess that's what really bothered me a little bit because there are 4 books in the series and there's also 4 men in the Hot Holes group. So you would assume that each book follows one of the Hot Holes. Because it didn't feature one of the Hot Holes, I feel like I was less into this story than the other ones. I guess you can say it's not what I expected and therefore I didn't enjoy it as much. On Goodreads, I gave this book 2 stars. Now on to the month of March. In March, I did not read a single book. I was just way too busy with school that I did not have time to read a book, sadly. So let's move on to the month of April. After reading the entire Sinners of Saint series, my friend who suggested me the LJ Shen books was also like, now you have to read the spin-off series of the Sinners of Saint, which is All Saints High. And guess what? I did. Yes, I read more LJ Shen books. That's some real diversity there in my book selection. Not. This spin-off series really just focuses on the kids of the Hot Holes and their lovers. The first book I read in April is Pretty Reckless by LJ Shen. This book features Daria, the daughter of Jamie, one of the Hot Holes, and his wife Melody. Daria is a rich, unapologetic punk. I would say she's one who takes pride in her family's wealth, and she's a popular girl at school. The second perspective in this book is Penn. Unlike Daria, Penn is not very wealthy and he comes from a very broken family. 4 years ago, Daria took away the only everything Pen ever loved. Because of that, all he wants to do is get back at Daria. And that goal of Pen's becomes so much easier because in the present, Daria's parents ends up fostering Pen. Reading this book after the Sinners of Saint series is like a breath of fresh air. The Sinners of Saint series focuses on the hot holes, and all the hot holes are bad boys, and although Pretty Reckless features Pen, a bad boy as well, it also features Daria, who's like a bad girl. The bad girl perspective is just so new and different, and I love it. If you are looking for another strong enemies to lovers book, this is your book. I highly recommend you read this book. I gave this book a 3-star rating. The next book I read in April, I read the second book of the series, which is Broken Knight. Broken Knight features Knight, who is the son of Dean and Rosie from Ruckus in the Sinners of Saint, and this book also follows Luna, who's the daughter of Trent in the book Scandalous. A large portion of this book focuses on how Luna and Knight come together as a couple while Luna is far away in a different state because of college, and Knight is at home finishing up his last year of high school. I would say this book is my least favorite in the series. I really didn't find anything special within this story. This story is really just like any other long distance relationship story. And because of that, I rated this book 2 stars. The last book I read in April is the last book of the All Saints High series. That book is called Angry God. This book follows Vaughn Spencer, who is a son of Vicious and Amelia, and it also showcases Lenora. In high school, between hooking up with a different girl every single weekend and breaking hearts, noses, and rules, Vaughn also finds time to bully Lenora. Lenora is a feisty one and she always fights back. After graduating high school, it turns out they both find themselves in Europe in the same location. They both attend this arts institution together. Basically, the story is another enemies to lovers romance novel. It really just showcases this complicated relationship between Vaughn and Lenora while they're in Europe, and it also really unravels this dark past of Vaughn Spencer. Honestly, I'm finding this book a little bit difficult to talk about without revealing what happens. This was probably my favorite book in the series. It is also the darkest book in the series as well. I just really have a thing for dark characters. That's just it. On Goodreads, I gave this book 4 stars. Moving on to the month of May. I read more books by LJ Shen because my friend was like, okay, so now you finished your first 2 series, you gotta read the 3rd series now. So I listened and I read the 3rd series titled Boston Bells. Beginning of May, I read the first book in the series, and that is titled The Hunter. The day after a party, Hunter finds himself starring in a sex tape. Because of his actions, Hunter's father is sentencing him to 6 months of celibacy and sobriety. While staying celibate and sober, he's going to be working for his father's company during the day, and at night he's taking college night classes. He is also forced to share a roof with Sailor, who happens to be Boston's nerdiest and least social girl alive. I enjoyed this story, but it wasn't my favorite either. I really didn't find anything special or that it factor that made the story really good within the characters' backstories. So even though this book was a fun read, I gave this book a 2-star rating. The next book I read in May is yet again another LJ Shen book. This one is a standalone titled Sparrow. Okay, so I was not originally planning to read this book, but after reading The Hunter, Sailor in that book is a daughter of the characters in this book, Sparrow. So me being the curious person I am, I was just interested in knowing more about Sailor's parents. So that is why I read this book, Sparrow. Sparrow follows Troy, who is the son of a dead mobster. He is known as a fixer who can make or break anything in the city. This book also follows a girl named Sparrow, who is just a regular girl that no one seems to remember. Basically, in this book, Sparrow is forced into an arranged marriage with Troy. This book really tells and explains the story of why this marriage was arranged and needed to happen. And this book really also just showcases a story of 2 people who get married but do not have any romantic feelings for each other, but in the end they develop real feelings for each other. I really like the character dynamic between Troy and Sparrow, but what I love about this book is also Troy's character. I just find his career as the fixer just so interesting. I gave this book a 4-star rating. Okay, I promise you that is the last LJ Shen book I read. After reading Sparrow, I was just like, okay, I need to take a break from LJ Shen books. I just read too many of her books in a row. So then I picked up A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. The genre of this book is fantasy, but it does have a strong romance element. This book follows Farah. Farah's family lost their fortune, and in order to survive, Farah is forced to hunt for food. While hunting in the forest one day, she spots a wolf. When she sees this wolf, she realizes how much food it will bring her family, as well as a decent sum of money it could give her family if she were to sell the fur of the wolf. Because of these 2 reasons, she decides to kill the wolf. Little does she know that this wolf is not actually a wolf. It turns out that this wolf is actually a fairy. Because Farah took a life of a a fairy. She must now live out the rest of her life in a magical kingdom in the fairy realm. While living in the spring court, Farah discovers that her High Lord is cursed and therefore wears a jeweled mask. As the story progresses, we get to see Farah's feelings for the High Lord turn from hostility to passion. That is the romance element, but also as the story moves forward, we learn that the Fairylands becomes an even more dangerous place to live, so Farah must fight to break an ancient curse to save her High Lord and the fairy realm. This book is basically a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little disappointed in this book. I really wanted to love this book, but I just couldn't because of this one factor. This factor being that the first chunk of the book was just very slow. The plot didn't really move forward. Because the plot was so slow, I kept on just getting distracted. It also got to a point where I was just reading words off a page, but I wasn't actually retaining the information because I was losing interest in the book and in the story. Also, I feel like this book lacked in development with regards to the romantic relationship. I mean, at one point it was just like they were civil and they were just acquaintances or friends, and then in the next moment they're lovers. And to this day, I'm just wondering, how did they get there? Like, how did they become lovers? What was the in-between? I'm not sure if there was actually a lack of development in the story about the relationship, or if that was just my issue where I just got bored with the story and I kind of just missed the part where they actually started developing feelings for each other. I don't really know. Yeah, so I'd say the first 2/3 of the book was just really slow. It really just dragged on. The story didn't really get good and exciting until the last third of the book. So as much as I enjoyed the story in the end, it's the fact that the first 2/3 of the book was just hard to follow and just not as engaging, and that is why I gave this book a 2-star rating. Usually if I enjoyed this book, I would continue on to the second book of the series, but because I didn't enjoy this story as much, I decided to take a break from this series and start a new book. So the next book I read in May is titled Cross the Line by Julia Johnson. Cross the Line follows Phoebe West, who is head over heels in love with her brother's best friend ever since she was a child. Despite several mortifying attempts at unrequited pining, nothing seems to make an impact on the man she's obsessed with until the day she finds herself in a life-threatening situation. After working in special forces and private security for years, Nate may be the only person who can protect and save Phoebe. But the deeper he pulls her into his circle of protection, it becomes harder to deny this unexplored attraction between them. This was actually a really quick and easy read. If you are looking for a book that goes into the trope of brother's best friend, then I would highly recommend this book. On Goodreads, I gave this book a 3-star rating. The next book I read is the second book of the A Kotar series, and that is A Court of Mist and Fury. As you know, after reading the first book, I wasn't very inclined to finish the series just because I didn't like the first book that much. But one of my friends actually pushed me to continue reading the series because she was like, you know, I agree with you about the first book, but it gets so much better. So I was like, okay, fine, I will read the second book. And oh my god, I'm so glad I did because it is so good. The second book is actually what made me really love the series. Just a little warning for those of you who haven't read the first book yet, but this little description I'm going to give you does contain spoilers. Anyways, in the end of the first book, Farah saves the spring court and saves the fairy realm, but in order to make that happen, she actually ends up dying and becomes a fairy herself. So in this book, although Farah is now a fairy, her heart remains human and she cannot forget the terrible deed she did to save the spring court. Nor has she forgotten the bargain she made to save her life, the bargain made with Rhysand, the High Lord of the feared Night Court. Throughout the entire book, a greater evil looms, and Farah might be the key to stopping it. This book really just explores Farah's journey into healing her broken soul, as well as working towards fighting against this greater evil. This book was so good, I literally could not stop reading it. After every single chapter, I just want to keep reading. The pacing of the book was really good. It was engaging from the beginning all the way to the end. So if you were like me who's hesitant to start the second book because of what you read in the first book, I am going to tell you what I was once told. It gets so much better and you need to continue reading the series. I'll admit, I'm pretty in love with the series right now. The rating I gave A Court of Mist and Fury is a solid 4 stars. I decided that the next book I would pick up is the third book in the series, and that is A Court of Wings and Ruin. I'm not really sure if I'm going to finish this book by the end of May, so I might just save this book for the next time I do a wrap-up video of what I read. Alright friends, this is the end of the video. As you can tell, I read a lot of romance novels these past few months. Yeah, there's not much diversity. But I promise you, starting now, I am not just going to be reading romance novels. This summer, I do plan on expanding the genre of books I will be reading. If you have any good book recommendations, please leave me a comment down below. I will check it out and maybe I will read it. I'm always looking for new books to read. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I had a really fun time filming this video. After this video, I do want to and I plan to make more book videos. So if you want to see me do book hauls, book TBRs, reading vlogs, vlogs, or monthly book wrap-ups, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Also, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys later. Bye!
Pull the key out the ignition. Run your mouth but I never listen. You hold me back, will never last. Keep talking all your shit. Wondering how all this started. You left me broken hearted. You flip my words, yeah, this love hurts. Keep talking all your shit.